Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, and today I will be carrying on with the Bob Durst trial, and it's day 2 and it's still the prosecution's opening statement. So we'll get straight in. And Durst found out about the reinvestigation into Kathy's disappearance earlier than what he said he had. Then it says Robert was writing cheques to himself to put money away for himself, just in case he needed money. On 9th of November, Bob sent a cheque to Susan for $25,000, which he sent this amount of money twice. Then Bob drove to Galveston to hide because this reinvestigation was going on, and he was planning on living there for the rest of his life or until the investigation went away. So on the 1st of November 2000, he rented an apartment on the ground floor for $300 a month, and it was a tiny place. While initially renting this apartment, now this is where it gets a bit weird. If you'd seen the Jinx, then you know, but he did it as a mute woman. In the interview, Bob says he didn't tell anyone who he was, so he assumed a different identity, which he often did. This time he used the name of an old classmate, the name of Dorothy Siner, but because he had a male voice, he decided he'd be mute. After he'd been in Galveston, he went back to New York, and in December he married his longtime girlfriend, Debbie Sheridan. But to Bob, it was a marriage of convenience. He was setting himself up to be a fugitive, and he could give Deborah power of attorney, and she could write cheques for him and send him money to wherever he was. The detectives were interested in talking to Susan, but they knew how close Susan was to Bob, so they kind of, hung back for a bit, but they never got a chance to speak to Susan before she died. Susan did lie to Bob and told him she had been contacted by the police, but then she hadn't, and the prosecution say this is what sealed her fate. In a police interview with Bob, he found out that law enforcement had never contacted Susan, but it said to her that he told her to go ahead and talk to the police after she said that they contacted her, and she said it would be the best for both of them, so he told her to go right on ahead. So Richard Markey, a friend of Susan's, was the last one to see Susan alive. Now we go back to the cadaver note, and it was tested for fingerprints and DNA, but they got nothing from that. So now they go over how the word Beverly was written, and the prosecution say it's very important to this case. Before Bob actually admitted to writing the cadaver note, he said in an interview only the killer could have written it. So he kind of shot himself in the foot with that one. Susan had been dead for more than 24 hours, and when the gun was fired, this is coming from the forensic pathologist, saying that Susan had been dead for more than 24 hours, and the gun was shot at close range from about an inch from her head. But the pathologist will testify, and they will say that Susan was killed between 10:30 p.m. on the 22nd of December and 9:30 a.m. on the 23rd. And they say that Susan would never have opened the door to a stranger, because she was very paranoid about these things. And a friend of hers say that you had to call her before going over, because if you just went over and knocked on the door, she wouldn't answer to it. So obviously the prosecution are trying to make the point of, she obviously let whoever killed her in, so she obviously knew them. On the 11th of March 2001, Maurice Black introduced himself to Bob and they became good friends, even though Bob says he was cantankerous. Maurice Black was the only one in Galveston that knew who Bob Durst was. And then they go through what happened when Maurice died. That it was an accident and they fought and Maurice was shot in the side of the face. And Bob said he sat there for hours thinking of what to do, and they start showing the torso of Maurice Black that they found in Galveston Bay, and other body parts that they found, but they never found his head. They show a picture of when Bob was arrested and charged with Maurice Black's murder. Bail was set at £250,000, which Bob paid because his intention was to go on the run. He said he would skip bail and assume Maurice Black's identity and go on the run. And in order not to be identified, Bob shaved his hair and eyebrows, and he looks so weird. So he goes on the run. After 45 days on the run, Bob was arrested in Pennsylvania for shoplifting food. He also shoplifted newspaper and Band-Aids. And then the prosecution say he did this while he had $500 in his wallet and $35,000 in his car. In his car, police found 2 handguns, marijuana and Maurice Black's driver's license. They also find a notebook, and in it was one of Susan's friend's addresses, phone number and where she worked. Which all sounds very odd. While awaiting extradition in prison to Texas, Bob makes a few phone calls, and one of these phone calls was to his wife, Debbie, and they discussed Bob's brother Douglas about something his wife thought he was going to do to Douglas, and the prosecution say Bob was going to kill Douglas. The defence stand up and object to that. Bob Durst testified at his Galveston trial, and evidence will show he lied during his testimony about Kathy's disappearance, where he was at the time of Susan's murder, and the true facts about Maurice Black's murder. So, Bob and Maurice used to go to shooting practice together. So the filmmakers of these interviews, Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling, will both be testifying, and they have the production company Hit the Ground Running, and they made the film All Good Things, which is based on Bob Durst and Kathy's marriage and, all that shiz. They didn't actually use the real names in the film, and Bob knew about the movie, and it was Bob's idea to do an interview while watching it. And Bob was told that by lawyers that it wasn't a good idea to do these interviews, but he did it anyway. And Bob said the movie was very, very, very close to pretty much what happened. Bearing in mind that the movie depicts Bob being the murderer of 3 people. The one part in the movie that Bob didn't like was where it was depicted that he killed his dog. He didn't like that bit. Everything else, fine. Dog, no. Bob, as always, and still does, talk to himself, and sometimes he wasn't aware he was doing it. In 2011, they interviewed Susan's son, Sereb, and he will also be testifying. He didn't know Bob before Susan's murder, but after Susan was murdered, they became close, and Sereb couldn't believe that Bob would kill Susan, and Bob had been helping Sereb out financially. But then Sereb finds a letter from Bob to Susan a year and a half before her murder, and it says, "Susie, now and again, I think about old times, but it's the envelope they're more interested in because the word Beverly is spelt wrong." So Sereb gave this to Mark Smerling, and they already knew about the cadaver note and the misspelling of the word Beverly. They didn't go to the police because they wanted to confront Bob with it first. But while trying to get this interview, Bob kept delaying it. But then they got the final interview that was done on the 18th of April 2012. Bob had no idea they had this Sereb envelope, and they show Bob the envelope, and he points out that the name Beverly is spelt wrong. Then Bob is shown the cadaver note, and Bob again points out the same misspelling. Bob says he did write the Sereb letter, which is the letter to Susan, but he says he didn't write the cadaver note. So they show him the Sereb envelope and the cadaver note side by side, and Bob can't say which one he actually wrote. Then they play the clip from the end of the final interview. For those that have watched it, you will know what was said. So they play the interview, and alongside it they're showing slides of what he was saying. So the first one says, he says, "There it is, you're caught." The next one is, "You're right, of course. But you can't imagine. They want to talk to him. That's good. I find them very frightening, and I do not want to talk to them. I don't know, the washer. Well, I don't know what you expected to get, but the rest of," and the rest of that was unintelligible. Then he says, "I don't know what's in the house. Oh, I want this. Killed them all, of course. I wanted to do something new. There's nothing new about that. What a disaster. He was right, I was wrong. And the burping. I'm having difficulty with the questions. What the hell did I do?" It's very strange. On the 13th of July 2012, Andrew and Mark wanted to speak to a number of Bob's former lawyers and also a private investigator that Bob had, and Bob told them they can speak to anyone they want. January 2013, law enforcement wanted to exhume Susan's body, but the prosecution lawyer told them that it would just be a waste of time because there'd be no DNA or anything on it, and it was obvious how she died. The FBI were also interested in Bob because of an unrelated incident in New York. Mark and Andrew then decided to reach out to the FBI after the interviews with Bob. The FBI were given the unedited footage, the letter, and the footage and the Sereb letter. So that's where we end day 2. There was no court on Friday, so we will be back on Monday, and hopefully we will hear the end of the prosecution opening statement and get on with the defence. So till then, bye for now.